Welcome back for the Teacher's Voice session. I just want to start by apologising to our online audience. You had a few issues coming into the keynote prior to this session. We will have it online for you, so it will be available if you had any issues accessing it. We have 4 speakers in this session. 3 are here on site in Canberra, and 2 speakers who are speaking together will come in online. I'll get my words together in a moment. So the first person I would like to welcome to the stage is Jane Polley. Welcome.
So do you bring it up? Do you bring up the PowerPoint? Yes. Great. Sorry. Well, hello everyone. My name's Jane Polley. I'm here as part of ACARA, the Australian Curriculum and Assessment Reporting Authority, and I'm the curriculum specialist for the arts. So I'm going to speak to you today about version 9. So that's the key changes and how it's refreshed and authentic and repositioned for 2024. Thank you, Tilda. I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on, and recognise any other people or families with connection to this country. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's presentation. Today, I'm going to speak to you about version 9 of the Australian curriculum. I'm going to show you the new website. I'm going to explain the learning area. I'm going to share with you some of the key changes and show you where to find some of the support and resources. So remember, in this 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes, I can only give you some broad brushstrokes, but please approach me at the conference today or contact me further if you'd like some finer detail. So the Australian curriculum is a web-based curriculum. So the website's really important. And for version 9, when you open version 9 of the Australian curriculum, this is your landing page. And you can see that there are important places for you to know about: student diversity, where to find resources, and downloads. But if you're looking for the content for your year level that you're teaching, you click here. You will go to the subject, you will go on to visual arts, if that's where you're looking for, in this case visual arts, and say I was a year 9 teacher, I would then scroll down to year 9 and then submit. So it takes me to my page of content and achievement standards. The achievement standard describes the level of achievement students are expected to achieve at the end of a band, in this case, years 9 and 10. So the achievement standard synthesises the content and describes the level appropriate approach to that content. In this example, we would be looking at that students use knowledge of visual conventions, visual arts processes and materials to create artworks that represent or communicate ideas, perspectives or meaning. So notice that in year 9 and 10, they're not consciously manipulating those visual connections, but they have knowledge of them. That manipulation might happen at the senior secondary level. So when we talk about the alignment between the achievement standard and the content descriptions, we mean which part of the achievement standard relates to which content. And it's been made clearer on the version 9 website with this highlight function. you can highlight sentences of the, or parts of the achievement standard, and on the same website page, you will see the corresponding strands, they're the organising strands up the top there, and the corresponding content as described in the content descriptions that align with that part of the achievement standard. And as you can see, a part of the achievement standard might be aligned to several parts of the content, not just one or two content descriptions. In this example, I'm in perhaps a Year 1-2 teacher, and I would like to combine visual arts and media arts. So I can click on those and have them on the website next to each other. And again, I could use the learning area achievement standard. That's relevant for all subjects. There's a learning area achievement standard in the primary space or subject-specific achievement standards. I can highlight the sentence I like, and again, I'll get the corresponding content descriptions. So also as part of version 9, we just refined and updated the learning area. And this pops down, when you go onto that page I just showed you, it pops down and you can click onto it to read this section, or you can click off it and go straight to the content. But I suggest that every teacher needs to read it at least once every year that they're teaching their subjects. All of them start with this introductory section. It's got the rationale, the aims. It gives the overall intent of the learning area. And for the arts, there is an overarching section for the arts. For example, you might want to just quickly remind yourself of the key considerations. For example, that you need to observe protocols for teaching and respecting First Nation Australian works and their intellectual and cultural property. But also in this learning area, you can click on each discrete subject, and each of these will have a slightly different structure to reflect the distinct nature of each subject. So in the visual arts, you have materials, visual conventions, visual art forms. In media arts, they have concepts. In drama, they have processes, etc. Now, as well as the learning area has been refined and decluttered, so were the key connections. It is a three-dimensional curriculum, the Australian curriculum. It has general capabilities and cross-curriculum priorities that also inform the content we teach. And also as part of version 9, there was a focus on what are the concepts that underpin what we do. For example, in the arts, that all students have creative and expressive potential. So to represent the cyclical and flexible processes of art making and responding, and the important idea that students learn as both artists and audiences, it's underpinned structurally by the four-strand structure. And I'm just going to explain a little bit about that to you now. So, in the version 9, the four strands have been made explicit, as I said, up there, up the top, and they have corresponding content descriptions, like I was telling you. But on a website page, you can only see 3 organising strands in a row, and you have to click through the presenting and performing strand to get to our 4th strand. So we've decided to make an infographic to help teachers see this more explicitly. It can be downloaded from the website, and it's under the Arts Downloads I showed you on that very first page, and it's called the Arts Poster. So the 4 strands are shown in a fan-like shape with an internal arrow that shows that you can move between the strands and you can move both ways and revisit strands. And surrounding the strands are the 5 art subjects. At the centre is the creative and expressive learner. It's to remind leaders, principals, schools as a whole, that not only do learners create, but they have to be given permissions to be audiences and to access the creative and cultural sector and all the rich offerings that are provided there. They are also the audience of their peers, and they are also the audience of their own work. So there are not practical strands and theory strands. All the strands are about cognitive and artistic processes entwined in the different activities that teachers construct. So in this strand, the exploring and responding strand, students learn as artists and audience. They're responding in practical ways using visual art practices and forms. Now, this strand is about the way the arts are a portal to the world, to ideas, to others who are different from ourselves, perspectives, to artists, cutting-edge forms. And students are expanding their understanding of human experiences, understanding of themselves, their own identity, etc. In this strand, developing practices and skills, they're responding to the visual arts, and they're developing through practices like play, imagination, experimentation, critical and creative thinking. They work individually and collaboratively to develop creative and critical practices. And these skills importantly include reflective skills, developing metacognition in our learners. So this multifaceted range of skills develops confidence, competency, efficacy for learners. It helps them to develop discipline-specific and technical skills to underpin their creative work. To ask students to be creative means that we provide environments where imagination is valued. Student autonomy and authorship is encouraged, risk-taking is inevitable, and failure can be part of the process. So teachers can model and foster a questioning stance and the making of connections, and in the process value originality and the generation and evaluation of ideas. When students present or perform, they are sharing work that they've created, which is a moment of vulnerability. So it requires bravery from them and for them to take risks. And to share work is to open it up for constructive feedback. Teachers create mutually supportive environments to encourage the sharing of bold and imaginative work. So becoming a presenter of their own work changes students' perceptions when they view the work of others, because they gain an appreciation of what it takes to create work, and they analyse and evaluate work from the skills that they have developed, sharing and creating their own work. Some other important key changes are that there is a separate foundation year now. Previously, all the arts were in 2-year bands, year 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Now there is a separate foundation year, highlights the importance of play, imagination, curiosity. In the foundation band, there's only one set of content descriptions. These cover all the art subjects, and you can see that the art descriptions are quite broad for this to allow working across the arts and play-based learning. If you were looking at a content description in foundation, you would see here that you're there in the foundation year. You could see that explore why and how the arts are important for people and communities. And if you wanted some ideas of how to address that content, you can look at the elaborations. Elaborations are not mandatory, they are illustrations of practice to help teachers address content. For example, you might be looking at communicating narrative or information. You could look at the animation series Little J, and because the Indigenous director of the cartoon, Tony Thorne, said colour in the landscape was a crucial part of designing a recognisably Australian setting, and for this I looked to artists like Albert Namatjira. For version 9, there are a strand of content descriptions under the exploring and responding strand that distinctly, explicitly include First Nations content. There are clear connections to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, organising ideas of country, place, culture and people, the central concept of identity, all amongst the context of living communities. And so when looking through this thread at the different levels, they take up slightly different emphases at each strand. For example, again, looking at that foundation strand, you could use age-appropriate resources like this one from the Department of Education in Tasmania. It helps young children to apprehend the concept of country as a multi-sensory and cultural place. It doesn't replace relationships with your local community or your school's relationship, but rather it's complementary resources for teachers to help them develop their toolkit for approaching First Nations work. In this example, when you're looking at examples of visual arts created by First Nations Australians, this teacher shares examples of patterning motifs and tessellation, using examples from the book Aboriginal Screen Printed Textiles, and includes bead Tangutalam's Tiwi bird. And a young student writes their reflections and responses to the artwork and says the artwork makes him think about how the birds are future people. In 3.4, we're looking at how the visual arts communicate connection to and responsibility for country. And on the Australian Centre of Moving Image website, you've got the work Two Girls from Amunguna, and it's based on the works of two senior artists, Arrante and Southern Luritja artist Sally M. Ngala Mulder, and Arrante and Western Arrante artist Marlene Ribacha. And they've developed their practice to be completely recognisable and representative of the place in which they live, which is Mabantwe Alice Springs. So questions for us as educators might be, for this one, which is about visual arts to continue and revitalise culture, what does it mean to continue or revitalise culture? What do we mean by culture? Oops, I have gone one back. Sorry. These resources are from the from the Art Gallery of South Australia, and they give tangible guidance in how to approach Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art. And I know there's fantastic resources in our galleries across Australia. At years 7 to 8, there is two parts to the content description. One's about looking at the diversity of artworks, and one's looking at culturally responsive approaches to Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. So an example of this that I've included is this rikawa that was taken from Tasmania, Lutruwita, 230 years ago, and it's now held in a French museum. It's been returned on loan, and the local community would like it back. So you could unpack that with your learners without being didactic about how they should think about it, but look at it at who owns work that has cultural authority, and then how do we become culturally responsive and respectful in our practices towards that. The Australian Council for the Arts also has guidance for protocols for using First Nations cultural and intellectual property in the arts, and that's a great resource to use also. In years 9-10, the content description is about celebrating and challenging Australian identity through artworks and visual arts practices. So this is an understanding that art is used to form collective identities, and it can be used for political purposes. It's a really rich area for this age group. They're also looking at their own identities as distinct from others and also working out where they fit in. And from an international perspective, visual arts can be, First Nations culture, could be seen as the only distinct or unique part of this country. And Archie Moore will be representing Australia this year at the 2024 Venice Biennale with works that directly engage themes of racism, identity and social change. So Australia's identity is not a fixed idea, it's an ever-evolving construction, and First Nations artists and art makers have important viewpoints that help define responses to this construction. Brings up notions of different worldviews, different lenses, etc. I'll quickly go through support and resources because I've only got a minute or two left. I'm developing a curriculum connection at the moment. It will be downloadable from the website, and it's called Digital Creativity, and it intersects the arts, English and technologies in the realm of using digital tools in one or all aspects of the creative process. There's also a professional learning hub where you can download little courses and modules that unpack various parts of the curriculum. For example, there's one, like I was telling you before, under the Understand This Learning area, the aims of the curriculum, what are they? You can go onto that hub and play a 2.5-minute video that will unpack them. Also, there are work samples published on the website at different year levels There's not one in every year level yet, unfortunately. That is what I'm working on at the moment. I'll be getting back to that when I get back to work. And the downloadable documents can be found, again, up there from the downloads. You can download all those support resources, examples of knowledge and skills. If I was a teacher, I'd be downloading all of them to help and put them into my folder for work. So thank you very much for today. It's been a pleasure to present to you, and I will hopefully see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. I know I'm a huge fan of the version 9 of the Australian curriculum, and I really value that it centres First Nations voices and the voices of artists. And I like that you shouted out to Vincent Amajira, who we have a show in March opening. So that was great. Thank you. We are now going to go over to our online presenters. So we have Tamsin Green and Wendy Richdale, who are coming in on the screen, and over to you online.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Just wanting to double check you can hear us. We're all good?
Hopefully.
Awesome. Okay,
We're
let's
good.
go.
We're good.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko wera te whakapaparangi mai, engari ko kimiriti te kāinga, ki te kura papahau ki wintika hau e mahi ana. Ko Wendy Richdale tōku ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. That was just a welcome to you all, letting you know that my ancestry relates back to Wales, but I currently live in Cambridge, New Zealand, and I work at WinTech in the School of Media Arts, and my name is Wendy Richdale.
Kia ora koutou, ko Tamsin tōku ingoa. E whānau mai au I Ahitelia ki te whenua o ngā tangata Gadigal, he uritini no Kotorangi, no Airini, no Itari hoki. E noho ana au I Kirikiriroa e Naene, he kaiako ahu ki WinTech Te Pukinga, he kai whakahaere toi ki Ramp Gallery. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. So that's just to say hello, and I was actually born in Sydney on Gadigal territories. My ancestors come from Scotland, Ireland and Italy, and I also work at WinTech Te Pukinga, and I run our gallery Ramp. So, kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. So I just wanted to start out by thanking everyone who's worked on bringing this conference together. My colleague here, Dr. Tamsin Green, and I were unable to attend in person, but we're very happy to be able to present virtually and appreciate your time. This joint presentation today is an opportunity to reflect on the tertiary gallery in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and its positioning as an active space for learning at WinTech's on-campus gallery, Ramp Gallery. I'm currently undertaking a PhD part-time while working as a manager of academic programs of both contemporary art and communication at WinTech School of Media Arts, a vocational tertiary education provider in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Prior to moving into this management role, I spent over 8 years as the curator and manager of WinTech's on-campus art gallery Ramp, delivering an annual program of exhibitions, workshops, seminars and events, a role that my colleague Dr. Green currently holds while teaching at undergraduate and postgraduate level at WinTech's art programs. My current PhD project brings together my curatorial and management expertise by examining the tertiary art gallery sector in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to uncover factors that influence the sustainability of the tertiary art gallery sector in New Zealand. I've recently completed my data collection, including interviews with over 20 galleries, and I'm beginning my initial data analysis phase. This conference is a good opportunity for me to touch on some initial impressions from the data and to present alongside my colleague who will be presenting a working case study of Ramp Gallery and interventions currently underway there to strengthen the gallery as an active space for student learning. In a conference like this of arts educators, I can feel fairly confident that most audience members will believe in the value of having an on-campus art gallery to enhance student learning. Most all of the arts sector would also understand the widely accepted benefits of a gallery from a wellbeing perspective, institutionally as a reputation builder, as a gateway to bring a variety of audiences into a tertiary space, and to the way a gallery can bring professional level art and artistic practice into a student's own spaces to enhance their learning in a safe and welcoming environment. But many of you will also understand the pressures faced by most of these galleries, operating on a shoestring and often with instability of funding. In times of crisis, it is often the arts and spaces like the Campus Art Gallery that can be struck from a ledger and deemed not core business by executive management that may not understand the values that these spaces bring. This was one of the driving motivators to begin my PhD study, and the fact that the sector in Aotearoa New Zealand is underrepresented in the literature. From my initial analysis of my data project, these issues are also apparent and close to the surface for many galleries that I spoke to, with comments such as, "The gallery is wonderful, but we have constantly had to fight for it." To be honest, the last few years have just been about survival and keeping the gallery open because it's such a rough time with so much change and financial troubles. And the arts are always vulnerable to cuts, aren't they? You know, whenever a recession hits, as we are in now, the first thing to go seems to be the arts. Across the sector, galleries and universities, polytechnics and wānanga, which are tertiary providers with an Indigenous foundation and focus in New Zealand, are set up in a variety of ways and are provided for with widely different allocation of resources. From large galleries with budgets over $120,000 to small spaces with $0 of operating funds. The resource allocation, unsurprisingly, seems to directly impact on the ambitions and outputs of the gallery, with the more generously funded galleries looking externally to increase their reputation and that of the institution, and the smaller unfunded galleries operating as a space for students to utilise when they will. It was also common for the gallery's real operating costs to be unknown and hidden amongst everyday running costs of the art department or school, so there was still a sense across the sector of most spaces being active, with regular exhibitions happening despite a zero budget in a number of cases. Most all galleries are, however, looking for ways to develop and improve, and are constantly looking for ways to articulate the value of the operations to their parent organisation. There is a desire to continually reiterate the necessity for survival. One of the ways many galleries that I spoke to did this was to keep a focus of students at the learning of this at the centre of their operations. That is, the students being their main stakeholders. To explore how value is articulated from a Te Ao Māori point of view, I'll focus now on one gallery, the Maya Gallery in particular, which has a long history, being purpose-built over 28 years ago. This gallery is founded on Indigenous kaupapa or principles. The building of the space itself was embedded with meaning and symbolism, with a curved wall in the gallery recalling the curve of a koru, or unfurling fern frond, which references the original creation stories and rebirth. The building is named after an ancestor that was important in the area prior to any European settlers arriving. It's this embedding of these symbolisms that engenders a sense of belonging in the students. They noted, it represents who we are as people. The building has to represent us as opposed to us representing the building. When discussing the strategic focus of the gallery, the staff member noted, the gallery has a genealogical connection to where we're coming from, and that allows us to create work inside the space. So in terms of creating a framework to operate within, that's the framework. It is an ancestral one. The setting up of the studio space that adjoins the gallery was also significant in the way of working, with a large collaborative spaces being the key. From a Māori perspective, this is called wānanga. It's a learning environment, so what actually happens is they learn off each other, they said, as much as they learn off us, and that's where the word wānanga comes into play. This concept of wānanga was returned to. Wānanga is a reciprocal way of learning. Wānanga is also a space or an attitude where discussion and consensus amongst groups are important for moving ideas forward in a collective way. This way of working in wānanga also encourages critical thinking, with the gallery and the act of curation being an important tool for teaching this mode of thought. They said, one of the skills we teach is how to curate, which is another important value, It makes you question and think, and that's the most important thing we can offer. It gives you another venue to ask questions, if you never stop asking questions, because the day you do that is the day that you die. One further concept from Te Ao Māori that stands out as significant is manaaki, which means to support and is often given through the act of hospitality. So physically having kitchen facilities available was a very important aspect of building a sense of belonging and community for the gallery. Students will use the space to cook and share food. They noted the kitchen, it's a meeting place. Manaaki is really important. It's a very important human value. At WNTEC's on-campus gallery, Ramp Gallery, Dr. Tamsin Green has been appointed as curator since the beginning of 2023. Dr. Green and I have looked at how to align Ramp Gallery to be an active learning space while directly being able to point to strategic priorities as a vocational education provider to give real-world learning opportunities for students. But more than that, it's an opportunity for this art gallery to be recognised and understood as vital in our learning ecosystem. Referencing some concepts from Te Ao Māori and combining these with adult learning pedagogies, RAMP has made some shifts to planning and programming in ways that activate the gallery as a classroom and authentically gives a space for students to be the core focus of the gallery, while still showing nationally significant artists in the space. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Tamsin Green, to discuss RAMP Gallery as a case study in this regard.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you everybody for having us. Sorry we can't be in the room with you. So let's see. As a public exhibition space in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton, the main issues at stake for RAMP are representational. Whose stories are told and how, what community relationships exist, and who has access to the space, who feels comfortable in the space, and whose work is valued and validated. So the questions that the RAMP curatorial program pursues are how can we share authority with community and ahunga students to address questions of representational, social equity and access in the arts. RAMP is a public exhibition space with education at its core, including the possibility of public education around the potentials of creative practices. So my position is that the most effective politics in the arts are strategies that address internal inequities within institutions. Representation matters and creative expression matters, but it can be difficult to see the structures of exclusion when you're inside of the institution. So some recent mechanisms that we've put in place to address issues of representation and access include establishing the RAMP Community Advisory Board, composing a values and vision statement, and undertaking surveys with community and ahunga students to find out, what is their perspective on this space. So this is a case study in how to operate as manuhiri, as guests in Aotearoa. And in response to the conference proposition of repositioning, this paper asks what we can learn from student and community voices and how we can apply key terms from Tau Māori, the Māori world, as Pākehā Europeans in Aotearoa. So firstly, what did the survey tell us? For the Artisan Community Survey, our intention was to measure the general perception of RAMP, its impact on creative communities in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton, and this survey was partly undertaken to identify any gaps in our engagement with communities and to address the application of our stated values and plan for future programs. So this survey was part of a self-reflexive strategy to interrogate real and perceived exclusions in the institution. For context, Kirikiriroa, Hamilton is a regional city in the centre of the North Island. We have one decent-sized museum, one pretty successful commercial gallery. We did have an artist-run initiative, but the person who was running it moved to Melbourne. And we have a lot of emerging talent. So it's a young city, it's a regional city. We have about 27% of the population who are Māori, as well as very active Pacific and migrant communities, but we have very limited spaces to publicly share and exhibit work. For the survey, we interviewed 20 plus artists and community members, either in person or on the phone, and they were given a small koha or gift for their time. Around a quarter of the interviewees expressed a perception in the community that the gallery was only for Wintec staff and students, and at least one person pondered if the gallery gave the impression that you needed a degree to show your work there. In response to one of the questions, does RAMP service any specific communities in the arts? The majority of Pākehā respondents thought that the gallery did a really good job of servicing the arts community broadly. However, almost all other respondents picked up on the subtext of this question. And Manama Salazano said that, the quote here, her first impression of RAMP is that it is a Pākehā space that is unlikely to include Māori and Indigenous thinking and work based simply on the outside presentation of the gallery. Before I engaged with RAMP, I thought the gallery was primarily there to exhibit student and staff work. So Marama is now on our community advisory board. So the important thing here is the perception of the space. RAMP is a white cube, shorthand for a type of exhibition space that was developed in the modernist period and intended to exemplify a kind of neutrality, white so that nothing distracts from the artworks themselves, which hold their own autonomous meaning, distinct from any social or economic conditions. This institutional neutrality, however, can be read as very Pākehā, very European. And whether this has actually been the case historically or not, narratives and perceptions in the public matter. So 2 people interviewed specifically mentioned the architecture of the gallery as a factor, the sensation that the space was unapproachable with concrete and glass frontage and a wide ascending staircase that made it seem fortress-like. Around 4 tangata whenua artists also said that although they personally felt very welcome and comfortable in the space, that was because they had a lot of experience in the arts and they didn't feel that other community members would necessarily feel welcome because of a lack of familiarity with what took place in the gallery. One tangata whenua academic even suggested the word gallery itself was maybe problematic as it speaks to a kind of exclusive fanciness. I'm paraphrasing there. And one student mentioned that they would go to the openings, but they didn't think they had the right outfit, the right clothing. So while there is a lot of goodwill towards the gallery and the community, it's a well-known space with a strong institutional history. There is a perception that RAMP services internal communities, and the way that we can address this is through better communication of the range of activities we provide, values, and the role of the board. So, as I said, the specific mechanisms we've put in place is a values and vision statement and a community advisory board. The founding of RAMP's advisory board is intended to function as an advocacy body and also a safety check on our cultural and representational politics, including the application of the value statement that you can see on the screen and hopefully read. So you can notice at the top here, there's a little bit of untranslated te reo. There are a few whakatauki that relate specifically to the arts, he toi whakairo, he mana tangata. And the untranslated te reo, or Māori language, in this document is an attempt to signal that we are trying to meet our obligations under Te Tiriti or Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi. Our values include ideas like manakitanga, a concept that Wendy has already mentioned, loosely translated as being a good host, showing a care for people via sustenance and comfort and hospitality. But manakitanga is also more than this. It is also an idea of keeping people culturally safe. So here we come to this important question of positionality. As a Pākehā European curator working with these terms, I acknowledge that I do not whakapapa to these ideas. That is, I do not have a genealogical understanding of the nuanced tikanga or customs that underpin these concepts. But I would argue that an uncertainty is actually a productive position to occupy, perhaps a more ethical position than any claiming to know, because there's a risk in using terms from Tau Māori that these terms become romanticized, co-opted, misused, and this is especially if we make claims to using these terms without any checks or balances. When Indigenous ideas, kupu words, are taken into non-Indigenous spaces, sometimes the meaning will be lost. Te reo, the Māori language, does not translate easily. So manakitanga is more than hospitality. It implies keeping your guests safe by ensuring that they follow the correct tikanga or customs. So in the abstract, I touched on this idea of tuakana-taina relationships as a model that we embed in the space that we foster. And in a tertiary context in Aotearoa, this concept of tuakana-taina relations is applied as a kind of co-learning. So it can mean different kinds of peer-based models And it's taken from the idea of a relationship between younger and older siblings, their different experiences, understandings, and competencies. So it can look like things like pairing up students from different year levels on shared projects. In the gallery, this looks like different types of mentoring and relationships. So as a condition of exhibition, artists are encouraged to think about what kinds of workshops they might run, what kind of students they might want to take on as mentees, and what the possible pedagogical outcomes of their work might be. And as a curator, I'm also actively involved in mentoring through our professional practice programs. But this is not the whole story of the term, Tuakana Taina, which implies a much wider understanding of whānau family within a whole world of hapu and iwi structures and obligations and relationships. Tau Māori is diverse and complex, and I don't have access and can't have access to the full implications of the term. So this is a tricky position to occupy as an educator, to try to hold oneself to an ideal while keeping open the possibility of your limited understanding of that ideal. I'm sure this would be very frustrating for teachers because you have to embrace uncertainty and try to, in the case of Tuakana Taina, it's something that I would say I'm actively doing without actually laying claim to. So a little practical example in the story just to finish us out. Over the last half of 2023, I was mentoring one particular student who was doing a curatorial internship with me in the gallery, a third year student. And because she showed some initiative and interest, I asked her to curate the final exhibition for the year, a graduate showcase based on an open call from other students' work. And this is the Ngāwawata is her poster for that show. So when it came time for the student to kind of organise their project and think of a title, the student, who was Ngāti Kahununu, wondered about using a Māori title, even though she didn't have a very confident understanding of te reo. So this small question became a big part of her learning on this project. First, she wrote out a list of all the ideas she had for the show, which were things like new beginnings, bringing people together, the end, optimism. It was kind of a big, long brainstorm. Then she asked one of our kaiko, who is one of the pathways teachers, who actually teaches te reo, to kind of translate these concepts for her. So they sat down and they wrote a list of different possible translations. And she was kind of happy with those translations. But then she went and asked another tangata whenua academic who immediately said, I disagree with those translations because they've been translated from the English concept into Tau Māori. They don't actually make sense grammatically or conceptually. So she was a little bit stuck. But luckily, we were doing community interviews at this time. So she was able to ask a third staff member for their advice, and they eventually sat down and found a title that was an equivalent expression of her concept, but from a Tau Māori perspective. So in this case, the gallery was a kind of platform or a space that facilitated different relationships and questions and made public a diverse type of learning that is often unseen. So we're doing a lot of different activities at RAMP. At the moment, we've got a residency by Wawahi Taha, which is a group of women with young babies who've been in over the summer doing community projects. We also have done some slightly different things. So for the exhibition Mahia Te Mahi, we commissioned a waiata, a song that was taught to students and staff in the space rather than having a catalogue essay, and the waiata related to the content of the work. And for an upcoming show, 100 Years, we've invited back 5 former students to show in the gallery, and we're inviting 5 writers, to write individual responses to all the works. So to conclude, this is the gallery itself as well. Tertiary galleries, because they connect artists' research to students, open up possibilities for varied pedagogical and mentoring relationships. Despite this, as Wendy said, they're often under threat within an education economy. But putting Akonga learning at the centre of our operations is one of our strategies, alongside power sharing and acknowledging the limits of our own knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if you can hear our applause here on site. Thank you again, both Wendy and Tamsin, for sharing your knowledge from Aotearoa. I think that the work you're doing is super important in connecting what museums and galleries can do to help support our schools in our students understanding how to be better audiences and how they can connect with arts institutions so that they can feel comfortable in these spaces and not just practicing on how to be artists. The next person I would like to invite to the stage is Andrew Sinclair.
Thanks, Leanne.
Feel free to use this or the keys.
Okay, thanks. Hello, my name's Andrew Sinclair. I'm from northeast Victoria, Wangaratta, Yorta country. Here speaking on behalf of Galen Catholic College and Dr. Trina Ham. Oopsie daisy. That's all right. Yep. I'm speaking about a project, and I know that other teachers here would have already been doing projects like this, but this has been a really positive project in our school. There's 2 projects I'll be talking about, and it's relatable not just to, as in itself to your school, but maybe an interpretation of these projects can be put into other schools based on location and Indigenous knowledge in those areas. It was a Year 11 RE project. Galen Catholic College is a Catholic school. And the teachers were Jim Salmon, Sonia Burke and Andrew Sinclair. RE in Year 11 is a compulsory subject, so we don't get just art students in this subject. It's an art-based subject, but we get a broad range of students in this space. My background. I'm a printmaker, and this is one of my first connections with Trina Ham. When I was in Year 10, I was lucky enough to do work experience with Bill Young, a master printmaker in Victoria. That day, I actually saw a plate by Trina Ham, and I actually remembered it. So when I met Trina Ham almost 30 years later, I was able to talk about that etching plate, and it made a nice connection with Trina. Through printmaking, it's put me in a great position where I've been able to travel to the Northern Territory, Torres Strait. I've worked up in Mara Island making prints, and predominantly in Gumbalanya, in Polley, and that's where I actually met Leanne Waterhouse, hence being convinced to do a talk about the work that I'm doing. And I speak about that because I stepped into the teaching role quite later in my career, but that collaborative approach in printmaking has been a really important way. As being a printmaker, you're really facilitating the artists to make their work, and then I apply that very much to my teaching, where I'm the secondary player to this art making. I'm really facilitating the students to make their work. It's just a very small little, I think, change in mindset, and these projects are very much that. They're very small, little, profound things that I find, quite unique, and they're very simple, but they make a very big difference. So positioning myself in the first project, this was done in 2019. The bottom work there is by Trina Ham. It's a small etching that we used as a launching place for a Year 9 painting and drawing class in year 2019, or 2018 was the year that we did the project. It was we employed Trina in the school. I'm very lucky that Galen engages Trina on many projects in acknowledging First Nation perspectives, and we're very lucky to have someone like Trina that comes with a huge amount of cultural capital, I suppose, and cultural knowledge, but also being very much a contemporary practicing artist, and then that's being able to relate back into our students. The workshop with Trina was a drawing workshop where we tried to limit the materials, looking at nature, patterns in nature, drawing on gum leaves. It was very organic, and it was a nice workshop, basic workshop. But from that workshop, we then realised that we were building a bit of a visual language, and it was also at a time where acknowledgement of country was coming into our school. And there was confusion about what this is and what we did with it and how would you do that. And now we take that for granted. But back then, it was a place to educate. This was a point to change this conversation. So we wanted to teach students about the difference between acknowledgement of country and a welcome to country. And this is where the artwork came about. So we developed it further and we looked at the Coolaman, and we're actually lucky enough to look at some of the resources at Melbourne Museum that actually had a collection of a shield that was collected from the Wangaratta region over 100 years ago. This was a great launching place to look at the mark making of that area and the signifiers of that country, and we developed it further into the top artwork there, which was probably, the size of an A1 sheet of paper. It combined all the students' views. And then we negotiated with Trina. Trina's done a lot of public artworks, and we pushed the school into maybe, I'm not going to say we pushed the school. The school was actually really willing and open to take on this as an acknowledgement of country panel for the school. We worked with a graphic designer, came up with different things, and this is maybe a bit of a point for other teachers that might take this on. There was a lot of conversation about, so we were making an acknowledgement of country, but the designer wanted to make a sign for that acknowledgement of country. So the design actually became larger than the artwork. So that was a push and pull and a negotiation, a teaching point about what the acknowledgement of country panel was. And so the panel, the information panel, the text panel, was much smaller than the artwork and was secondary to it. It has the school's acknowledgement of country, and it also acknowledges Trina Ham as the artist. The artwork is in the centre there. I have a huge thanks and appreciation to Jeff Neal, who was the fabricator of the artwork. He actually negotiated a lot of the problem solvings that we came across, such as trip hazard with the work, and how to get such detail in 10mm of core 10 steel. This project was collaborated with Trina about how to, the position of it, whether it goes up on a wall, whether it sits somewhere, and the position of it in the ground was very important as well, because that was a place where you would actually acknowledge the country you're on. We only used visual work in the panel, so there's no language, there's no text in the work. And this was also an interesting conversation that came out of transfer of knowledge through oral communication. So the idea is now that acknowledgement of country has all those symbols in it, and the senior students transfer those stories about country through the symbols in that artwork. And that was, I thought, a really beautiful connection to oral histories. And it's become a very successful piece of work in the school grounds, where we actually do have a place where we can acknowledge Indigenous First Nations. So when I walked into school one day, I wasn't part of this committee, I was greeted with this. So it's already become a really great point of reference. Now, this project was done last year. This is the Year 11 RE and Art project, and this is our launching place for the Totem project. So that we already had this work and we had this relationship with Trina Ham, so it was a great place. It was empowering for Trina to come back to a space and explain what this work is. So not only the fact that it was acknowledgement of country and her Indigenous perspective, but also the fact that it's a public artwork. And that's what we were educating these students about how to make it successful public artwork. Trina loved it. It was an outdoor classroom. It empowered her to not be inside the confines of a room or doing a PowerPoint. And it acknowledged Trina Ham as the First Nation person. And this is something that I took away from a professional development with NGA, Leanne, in Shepparton, which was First Nation Voices First. So we started the project from Trina's perspective. The teachers certainly stepped back from this area as well and just allowed that storytelling to happen. Throughout the PowerPoint, I've put in quotes, the First Nation perspective of Trina, and this was through a phone conversation with her last week. She has been very generous with her time in giving advice and guiding these projects. I'm really, again, the printmaker's assistant, just running with the project. The background on the project is that Galen Catholic College is about 1,000 students, and I've been asked about how many Indigenous students we have at our school. We have about 30 Indigenous students that identify as Indigenous, but that's not a open knowledge thing. Mostly farming families, and that's the background of, Galen. It's a Catholic school, and about 2 years ago, that's quick, they introduced a house system. The house system's based around the Catholic saints, 8 houses. Then there was a directive about how do we incorporate some Indigenous perspective in this? How do we align maybe some Yorta Yorta totems into these houses? Okay, so this was the challenge that was put to me during this class. Year 11 RE and Art was a great way to explore this as a topic. Cutting straight to the chase, this is what we came up with. So these are some artworks that were developed by the students. They broke into their house groups, they developed these pitch posters, and then these posters were actually presented to the house leaders as a sort of, this is what our totem could be. And the idea is to push this into a final public artwork. Broad selection of students, which was really great. And, if you look at the top left-hand corner, brush-tailed rock wallaby, that was done by a student that obviously is not engaged with school. We're lucky to actually have him starting to turn up to the classes, but also very good at graffiti work. And it was quite empowering for him. He ended up doing headings for other groups as well. So it was about bringing all these students, these multiple perspectives, multiple skills together to develop these posters. And that's one of the things. These projects were about research into animals, ecology, research into how to represent your house spirits in an animal, and it expanded. Like, again, on the top left-hand corner, you've got the grey goshawk, and the bird sound is written around the border. Trina Ham really engaged with this project. She really liked how it was operating and how it was running. We gave the students space, time, and we really centred the students around in their own self-exploration about these topics. The main part of the idea was how we get here. Okay. So we really got the students out of the classroom with trying to think about different ways about making work. We were lucky enough that Wangaratta had recently commissioned an artwork or public artwork called The Beacon, the water tower, local water tower, a mural artwork inspired by the Panorang concept Diawara, meaning together and united. The water tower depicts animals of the area and plains of the waterways. It's quite interesting because it really aligned to the project that we were doing. But this artwork is also very controversial in our local area. And the students really, they came with those opinions. So it was a great way, actually, when you get a negative point of view like this, you actually expand it and talk about it and talk through it. One of the critics was a 16-year-old student called Shay Lee. And, she came with those typical conversations about why didn't the council spend the money on the roads or the potholes. And you can obviously see that that's mirroring from parents. But one of the interesting things about Shay Lee is that she's now picked up Year 12 art, not because she likes art, but just because she thought these projects that we did in RE and Art were quite interesting. She still sort of didn't connect the idea of art and the totem project. The second part of the engagement with students of giving them knowledge was the artist talk by Trina Ham. This was again done outside of the classroom. It was done at Wangaratta Art Gallery, and a huge thank you to Inga, who's in the audience today. She really does help engage the gallery into the school, and we often take students there, and there's a huge amount of cross-inspiration, cross-pollination there. But in this case, Trina Ham actually delivered the talk, and it was great also. We gave her the space to do that talk, and it was certainly a step back for me. And allowing another person to talk or Trina to talk, it's a very different voice to a teacher talking, where a teacher is trying to cover curriculum or the learning outcome or anything like that. Letting an artist talk and go on those different tangents is quite inspiring for the students. And you could actually see that with the students, the attentiveness to Trina, but also the recall, because the students picked up the knowledge because it was delivered in a different format, a different way. Trina talked about the possum skin cloak. I want to describe this. And it was quite interesting. A possum skin cloak is quite a traditional object, but this is a contemporary artwork. Okay, she read through the cloak, read through those symbols, and again, the students picked up on that symbology in the work. And I just want to quickly note, it really was a connection for students. One of the questions from a student was, did your mother teach you how to make this possum skin cloak? Now, this is really poignant. Trina is part of the stolen generation. So that's, again, like first contact for those students. It's real life stuff. So, yeah, it was quite profound, for students to actually experience that. And for the teachers as well, because that's real learning. And this is where, it's quite topical at the moment, navigating that appropriation inspiration. And this was the important teaching point, I think. Very small, but a very simple thing to teach. We weren't appropriating Yorta Yorta totems, and we weren't appropriating Trina Ham's totems. We were taking the concept, we were learning from it, and we're moving through that space and in a safe space. We were sort of given this by Trina, and we centred the student there to explore that knowledge. And we raised awareness. So we took the concept of a totem animal, but we applied it to today's contemporary context of our ecology and our environment that's in turmoil. Okay, we took the idea of needing to protect endangered species. And we wanted to localise that. We didn't want to, have protected species of leatherback turtle up in the Torres Strait. We wanted to hone that in. So we were very lucky. There's great resources out there. Victoria has a website called Swift that actually is about vulnerable species in our area. And I'll just give you a quick anecdote about how powerful this was. Archie Crispin, who was also very disengaged in learning, mostly watched the cricket during class. He actually came and spoke to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Sinclair, I've just seen that white bird at McDonald's." And I assumed a seagull, but it was the grey goshawk that was his totem project. And that's on the Hume Highway at McDonald's at Glenrowan. So if you're going down that freeway, you might see that bird. And I think that's also a very important thing. If he saw that we were doing Yorta Yorta totems, he would have separated that knowledge to someone else's knowledge. But he actually encompassed that and took that on, and he will go on with that knowledge as well. We engaged students with different art making. We did the posters, we did drawings. This was over a 10-week period. We did a lot of different things. We did research, we did, PowerPoint presentations and exams and stuff like that. But the basic thing was trying to keep kids making and keep doing. These are the little plasticine models that we hope will be used in the next iteration of this project. Trina wanted me to cover this point. Why is this art? It is culture, it is art. It reinforces the connection of environment and culture. And that was a really important point, I think, that our environment is part of our culture. There is a concept that we use the visual language to communicate the concept. And the important point we're teaching the students is that art brings awareness. So to protect these animals, we're going to use the power of art to raise the awareness of these animals. And that's working. Where to from here? The next cohort, next year 11 students, they'll be picking up these totem projects, and they'll be running it throughout the classes as well. And the one positive story, or another positive story out of this project, is that they've already won an art prize for the totem project for Chisholm House, which was the Regent Honeyeater. Those students have nominated to donate their winning money to the Regent Honeyeater project. So already we're starting to see some positive changes for our environment, which is fantastic. We've got some other things that we're hoping to come on as well. The reason I'm here and the reason I'm talking on behalf of Galen, Jim, Sonia and Trina is that I find that this is really important in our pivot, our repositioning in teaching. We've got Indigenous knowledge in Australia that's 65,000 years plus. It's embedded in the landscape in all of Australia. It's all unique in different places because the landscape is different. The ecology is unique in every area. So looking after the environment is very important to me, and I hope that students, not of Galen, but of Galen, but all of Australia, can actually see the uniqueness in their environment. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. You will never tell me a story over a dinner table again because I convinced you to come and do that. But just like the first time I heard it, I was inspired all over again. It's an amazing project. And I really love seeing that cross-disciplinary learning that can happen across our schools. Our final speaker before we go to lunch is Bill Tink, I said that wrong, didn't I? Sorry.
One of my students years ago made up a song about me that was Mr. Tink, he'll make you laugh, he'll make you think. And so I thought that was very cute. After 20 years in visual arts education, I took a gamble on a role as the environmental learning advisor at NetWaste. And so I now work on behalf of 25 member councils in a voluntary waste group, which was not even something that I knew existed until that point in time. But NetWaste is based in Orange on Wiradjuri country, and it was wonderful to be able to follow on from so many great speakers this morning. The themes that came through to me in terms of art being a vehicle for awareness, the lecture giving way to guidance, outdoor learning in the outdoors, issues of access and engagement into gallery spaces all really link to what's happening in the waste to art space. And so just getting my head around how that works. And so one of the images that I wanted to start the talk with was made by a student in Dubbo, made from obviously aluminium cans. But if you look quite closely, there's some really careful approaches to embellishment in that work. And it's a really great way, I think, to start, because in the gallery setting, we often see works very similar to this, yet this has been produced almost from an outsider art perspective by a student working independently. In terms of Waste to Art as an exhibition, it's a vehicle that we're using with our 25 member councils in the Net Waste region to try and bring awareness to issues of waste. And even though my title is Environmental Learning Advisor, my job is effectively to get people to use the bins that are put out for collection by the council correctly. And that's a pretty big task. I didn't realise quite how big that task was, in fact. So Net Waste, as I mentioned before, is made up of 25 member councils. It stretches from Broken Hill to Lithgow. So this year I've been out to Broken Hill twice, which has been fantastic. I've been to Lithgow a couple of times as well. It stretches also to Coonamble in the north, all the way down to Cowra and Wedenshires in the south. It covers a third of the state. And so within that space, you can imagine there's some fairly diverse approaches to learning, and there's a diverse range of resources that our councils have throughout the Net Waste region. One of the things that Net Waste attempts to do as a voluntary waste group is to leverage the success of larger councils for the benefit of smaller councils. And I don't think you probably expected to come to a visual arts conference and hear about the disposal of waste tyres, but there are all these complex waste streams that exist that we really don't think much about, because once we drop a product that we're finished off at a materials recovery centre or at a landfill, it kind of drops out of our minds and we no longer think about it. But for councils, it's a huge challenge to get rid of all these wastes. And if there's anything that we can do on either a large scale level or a small level, that's really important in terms of the process of getting to heal country. The Waste to Art program came about 20 years ago. It was borrowed from a council further north, and Waste to Art exhibitions exist throughout Australia and throughout the world, and it's something that we don't lay claim to at Net Waste, but we have been running it for 20 years. And in my first year at my first school, my Year 9 students made a project for the very first Waste to Art in Orange. So there was a lovely connection there for me with this particular program. It's a community art exhibition in that we allow artists to enter the exhibition, but we also have a community section. So recognised artists who've had an exhibition don't compete with community members in the Waste to Art exhibition. And so that means that people can feel very confident to try and exhibit their works where a lot of competitions, particularly in regional areas, there may be one or two really strong artists in that community that they think will take out the prizes. So it's a really good chance to try and encourage engagement. We have primary school entries all the way through to community entries as well. The way that it works is each of our member councils can take part in Waste to Art if they choose to do so, and they have the resources to do that. And what that means is that we'll have large councils like Dubbo and Bathurst holding very large-scale Waste to Art events, right through to little Waste to Arts that might take place at the council pool, because that's the only space that's available for the exhibition, or at community centres. They all have their own local flavour, and you can imagine a Waste to Art exhibition and competition held at Broken Hill is very different to one that's held at Lithgow. And so all of these different exhibitions that are held have winners that come through to our regional showcase. The regional showcase was an opportunity for myself to look after and curate the first exhibition. And when I was tasked with that, I knew that I needed to get some significant help. Having been a visual arts teacher who'd worked in the high school space, I was very grateful that Sarah Randall, Joel Tonks and Heather Pike, who all work as curators in the Bathurst and Orange gallery spaces, were able to come and work on the regional showcase, which was held last year at Platform Arts Hub at Blaney. Platform Arts Hub was a refurbished train station that the council are very keen to see used as a visual arts space. We had over 120 people attend the regional showcase. We had 100 artworks from 13 different councils on display, with a couple of other artworks that we snuck in there so that we could display the works of people from councils from some of our areas where the council didn't run a Waste to Art, but we had one entrant, so we still brought those through to our regional showcase. And it's an opportunity for people who wouldn't necessarily view visual arts in a formal gallery setting to come and see the entries that have been made by their children or by friends or by themselves as members of the community. And you can see this photo really captures the spirit of Waste to Art. We've got a little kid there all the way through to older people coming in. The Mayor of Blaney, Scott Ferguson, is shaking hands with one of our winners. And thanks to Sims Medal, our very generous sponsors, we have over $11,000 in prize money that we give out at the regional showcase. So it attracts quite a number of people to that event. And if a Year 11 or Year 12 student or a Year 11 or Year 12 student can win $500 in prize money, that goes a long way to getting some great art materials for those students. I'm not sure if this little clip will play, but this is part of some of the social media that we put together for the regional showcase. You can see here 100 people outside at the Blaney train station, Rhett, our sponsor from Sims Medal, and the Mayor shaking hands with some of the winners. But the community spirit that comes along with Waste to Art is something that we're very proud of. We have a lot of categories. When I took over Waste to Art, I saw all these categories and I thought, wow, how do we possibly judge and look after all of these different categories? But it actually means that we get really good participation, that there's an opportunity for everybody to put something into the show. And even in the two-dimensional category, when we're looking at making artworks from recycled materials, this particular pointillist artwork was made with recycled textiles waste, and it wouldn't have been in the work if we didn't have a 2D community category, and it's quite an exciting way for things to happen. So each year in Waste to Art, we encourage all of our entrants to use materials that would be traditionally discarded to landfill and make a work with those materials. The idea being that we start a conversation around the waste that we generate. So Waste to Art aims to inspire young people and members of the community to think about a theme waste each year. And last year, our theme waste was textiles and fast fashion. So every year, Australians throw away 27 kilos of textiles waste per person. And now I know I don't throw away 27 kilos of textiles waste. So there are some people out there who are throwing out 50 kilos of textiles every year. And that's a pretty sad statistic, realistically. And for us, if we want to start a conversation with the general community around how we reduce our waste, we believe that waste to art is a great way to do that. But if we tried to tackle every waste stream and every object that ends up in landfill, it's quite overwhelming and quite demoralising and upsetting, particularly for young people. I really like to focus on the good news stories of how things are actually recycled and how the product stewardship that we see around us is getting better and better every year. One really good example of product stewardship is now at a lot of shoe retailers. You can take your old shoes back in, drop them into a box, and they'll be broken down, and a lot of the material for that will be shredded, pelletised, and turned back into the rubber that's used to make basketball courts. And when my children saw this, they were like, "Oh, Dad, look at this, they're recycling these materials here." And the more awareness that we have around product stewardship, the better we're going to see the outcomes for reducing the amount of waste that we put into landfill. And so for us, we partnered with we look for opportunities to advertise various recyclers who can help with the waste streams that we're involved in. So I ran a zero waste workshop creating recycled textiles animals with the students at Kajigong Valley School in Mudgee, and any of the material that was left over we sent to Apparel, who for a small fee will pick up and recycle your textiles waste. Some of the challenges for councils when they go to run a waste to art exhibition at the community level, either too much community enthusiasm or too little community enthusiasm. There, at the council level, we have issues of logistics. Costs, unfortunately, have nearly doubled in terms of transportation of works, and for our regional showcase, that poses a very big challenge for us in terms of those costs. In terms of equity between larger and smaller councils, and even the tyranny of distance for our far-flung councils, there are some challenges there for waste to art as well. And in terms of building long-term partnerships, a lot of times in the council spaces in regional areas, there will be people who are there for a few years and then move on to another position. So continuity can be an issue for us as well in that space. But when I, in my role as the Environmental Learning Advisor at NetWaste, go to schools and community meetings to talk to people about ways that we can reduce our waste and ways that we can use the recycling service correctly, it's a very dry topic. It's very hard to get people motivated and excited in that space. And so having artworks like this artwork made by Alan Stanger from Dubbo to use as visual material for learning with the students really sparks some great conversations. And you'll have some it's very hard to make a relationship with students that you're just seeing for a one-off workshop. And if you have stunning visuals like this that are made within the local community that reflect the humour and vibrancy of the location that you're visiting, it's a really great way to start conversations with students rather than trying to tell the students what to do. Again, coming back to that idea of walking beside people and guiding people rather than lecturing people on how to do things. So this is a great story and a great example of how Waste to Art is a vehicle for generating conversations around how we can be better in the space of waste reduction. At Alan Stanger's work, everybody would have a drink from a single disposable plastic cup and then throw that cup into the bin each time they came into the break room. And that happened every day for months. And at the end of every day, there is a bin just full of plastic cups that unfortunately in that particular area can't be recycled through the conventional recycling system that they have. And rather than having a conversation where he lectured the other people that he worked with, he made this artwork from those discarded cups for Waste to Art and told that story to the people in his workplace. And it started a really meaningful conversation where they were able to work out ways that they could easily solve that waste problem, but it came about in a very subtle way in which people could make up their own minds based on looking at a work and somebody presenting their idea and their concept in a very different way. And it does bring me to the disposable coffee cup as a really good example of something that we were really good at using keep cups up until COVID. And the disposable coffee cup has come back into play as an example of waste. But if you are to try and lecture somebody on what they should do with that particular material or inspire people to bring their keep cup along by just telling them that it's the wrong thing to be doing, it's quite a different conversation. Immediately you get that feeling of, oh, well, hang on, I'm busy, or that was what was provided. And that can be quite difficult. But when the conversation stems from looking at a work of art and contemplating that for yourself, it's a very different way of learning in that space. We also get to tell some terrific stories in the Waste to Art space. Young Dominic Carpenter from Mudgee created this artwork, City from Above, We had tours at our regional showcase. We had over 650 community members and students come through the regional showcase. And in each class, 1 or 2 students would come and sit in front of Dominic's work. It explores his way of what he believes the city to look like from the air, from materials that he recycled. He wanted in his artist statement for people to be aware that he's a young boy who has autism, and his experience, his lived experience, is something that the community could share through his artwork. And his artwork really spoke to a lot of the students who went through that exhibition. And in terms of a social media presence for raising awareness for lots of different things, not just waste education, Waste to Art works well in this space. We have some really exciting initiatives in recycling, and one of the fantastic things is that textiles waste can be shredded down and put into ceramic and other material and used as a building product. If we were to have legislation in New South Wales or nationally that said that every new home or structure that was built in the country had to contain 25% recycled materials, we'd see a very good outcome almost immediately on our waste streams. It would make them very valuable. Teachers have been using Waste to Art in their various council areas to create case studies for their students. This is a Year 11 visual arts assessment task where the students use the theme of textiles and fast fashion. They researched that topic and then, as a result of that, made a series of artworks that were on display. There's nothing like the pressure of knowing that your artwork will be displayed in the community space, and they were displayed in the Orange Library. In this work, the 2 students who put this particular piece together explored ideas around scale and colour and how that scale and colour represented the impact of textiles waste and fabric waste in marine ecosystems. And to read through the statements that they've written about their work, you can see that some really deep learning has happened as a result of them engaging with the Waste to Art process to make these artworks. Our councils have very different experiences, as I mentioned earlier. Dubbo uses the Waste to Art program as an opportunity to bring people into the gallery space who wouldn't traditionally have been people that they would expect to get into the regional gallery in Dubbo. So by holding a competition where lots of students and lots of artists who might be emerging artists or amateur artists can be a part of that, means that they draw people into the gallery. So they use it as a vehicle for community engagement, and for Net Waste, we can use it as an opportunity to start some conversations around the ways that we reduce our waste. The Broken Hill experience, they came on for the first time last year, and they had a trashy fashion parade with materials made from the Waste Recovery Centre at Broken Hill. Broken Hill's exhibition was held at their Lifeline shop, which is at their waste transfer station. The Lifeline shop is a really large structure in which people can buy furniture and all sorts of other things that are recovered before they go to landfill. And so there were 2 or 3 agencies, including the Broken Hill Art Exchange, who all came together to create a really dynamic community event that served a lot of purposes, including raising money for Lifeline and raising awareness of the fact that community members could bring any material that was appropriate for regifting could be brought to the Lifeline shop and used by others. In Bathurst, they have a really strong primary schools and schools focus and align their Waste to Art with a sustainability showcase. So again, looking at ways that we can combine those different exhibitions. In your classroom, there are some fantastic opportunities to show students recycling on a number of levels. There are a number of players now like TerraCycle who will take and recycle complex items. Unfortunately, many of the materials we use, like pens, are incredibly cheap to manufacture and incredibly expensive to recycle, but there are lots of people in that space now who are starting to recycle those products. We also work in workshops with students to show them how things are made, because increasingly that's a knowledge that's not as apparent to students. And when it comes to paper making, it's a really good example of students being able to see how a material can go from its current raw form, be pulped and be reproduced. So some recycling in action. Waste to Art will move to a truly zero waste event itself. In terms of the dreaded bubble wrap, there are hex wraps now and other materials that can be used in the place of harder to recycle products. And for us, even our tags, at one point, the dreaded laminator got a fair bit of use as part of previous Waste to Art exhibitions, but to produce a tag for a one-off that can't be recycled is something that we're going to look at improving. looking at artists and engaging with artist practice with our students and our community members through workshops that are run either at the council level or the regional showcase level means that we can talk to students about the fact that all the artworks they produce do not have to be ready-mades. So we don't just have to see raw materials that might have ended up in landfill glued together, but those materials can be torn up, rewoven and refined. So some engagement and some development goes into teaching, developing workshops for teachers to teach teachers who mightn't have an arts background how they could better and more sophisticatedly engage with waste to art. And there are some projects, particularly one that's happening in Mudgee, that will draw educators from around the area to work with artists to help improve the quality of our entries in waste to art and the visual arts experience for the entrants. In terms of the impacts and influences, and to finish up my talk on waste to art, some of the things that happen in the waste to art space, I was really hoping to have an opportunity to plug the different programs that we have, to have education cards up around the room to encourage people to do the right thing when it comes to recycling, to have people think about how they can repair and reuse items. But some of the unintended consequences that came out of being involved with waste to art and using my arts training background to try and inspire people in different settings was that we had all of these young people who may not have had success in the visual arts sphere, even in their own schools. They mightn't have traditionally felt that they were the artwork, the drawing or the painting that they had done with their art teacher was particularly successful. But they stumbled across something in the freedom of making an artwork with found objects that allowed them to create artworks that were on display for the public to view, where people looked at them and said, wow, that looks fantastic. You could see for the look on a student's face when they have that level of engagement for the community is really exciting. I had 4 years in my last teaching role at Skillset Senior College in Bathurst, where I worked with at-risk youths in an alternate education setting in a little school of 100 students. Those students made an entry last year for Waste to Art with their fantastic teacher, Carly, and this artwork was in the paper on a number of occasions. And for those students to be in the newspaper, to be recognised for their artistic talent as a class, you can see the smiles on their faces speak for themselves. They came and then toured the exhibition, where they may be a little bit more nervous about going into the gallery initially. Once they've viewed an exhibition like that, they've had a work on the wall. In talking about community engagement and getting people into the gallery, what a great first step for some of those students to be able to take. There are intergenerational conversations that come into play around waste. And so I really think it's exciting that people get to view artworks in Waste to Art that are made particularly by primary school aged children. And because the conversation is happening around an artwork, somebody may have done something in the waste space for the last 40 years, something as extreme as piling up and burning rubbish on their property because that was the easiest way to get rid of it. And then after engaging with a younger generation and thinking about those issues in a Waste to Art space, they may realise there are other ways that they could approach things, but they're not being spoken to in a harsh or directive way, and that's working very effectively for us. And the waste education and for engagement in the gallery and attendance space has been quite good for us. I would just like to thank the New South Wales EPA, who fund Net Waste, for their generous support, Sims Metal for their sponsorship as well, and like everyone who's here today, who's either formally acknowledged the people who are working in the background as well, but for me, I have quite enjoyed being the face of Waste to Art, going around and talking about it, meeting with community groups, working in the workshop space. But Heather Pike, our administration support officer at Net Waste, does all the heavy lifting in the background, and I do need to acknowledge her. And I think in most school settings and other settings, there are people who do a lot of work behind the scenes who don't always get recognised. So I do thank Heather Pike, and I have to say thanks as well to the team who put together all of the tech for us today as well, and to Isaac, who I'm sure was getting emails even this morning from the team.
Still getting them.
Still getting emails now. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill. Your passion for waste is alive and well in your presentation. Thank you to all 4 of our presentations today. We are breaking for lunch online as well as on-site. Online, we will see you back in the theatre here at 1:45 Australian Eastern Standard Daylight Savings Time, I forgot to say before, and everyone else at the same time back here in the theatre. Thank you.